A lonely widow helped reunite a lost child with her parents, only to discover it was her own granddaughter. Eleanor Winters hadn't expected anything extraordinary on that rainy Tuesday afternoon. The weather matched her mood, gray, heavy, persistent in its melancholy. 3 years into widowhood, Eleanor had settled into a routine that felt less like living and more like existing. Wake up, make tea for one, water the plants her husband James had once tended with loving care. Pretend the silence wasn't deafening. Eleanor pulled her faded blue cardigan tighter around her thin shoulders as she made her way through the park that cut through her neighborhood. The rain had temporarily subsided, but droplets still fell from the leaves above, occasionally landing on her silver hair with a gentle pat. This daily walk was her concession to James's memory. He had always insisted on daily exercise, even in his final months when cancer had ravaged his once strong body. "You've got to keep moving, Ellie," he'd told her, his voice raspy but determined. "Promise me you won't just sit and gather dust when I'm gone," she'd promised. Some days, like today, that promise was the only thing that got her out the door. The park was nearly empty in the late afternoon gloom. Most parents had collected their children from the playground at the first sign of rain. Eleanor paused by the swings, watching them sway gently in the damp breeze. How many years had it been since she'd pushed Catherine on these same swings? 25? 30? The memory felt both razor-sharp and impossibly distant. A small sound caught her attention, something between a sniffle and a hiccup. Eleanor peered around the metal frame of the swing set and spotted a little girl huddled beneath the slide. No more than 6 or 7 years old, the child had pulled her knees to her chest, her face mostly hidden by a curtain of dark hair. She wore a red raincoat that seemed too thin for the April chill. Eleanor hesitated. Children had never been her natural territory, ironically, considering she'd raised one of her own. Catherine had often accused her of being too rigid, too concerned with rules and schedules. "Not every problem can be solved with a proper routine, Mom," Catherine had snapped during their last explosive argument 10 years ago. Eleanor hadn't seen her daughter since. The little girl looked up suddenly, sensing Eleanor's presence. Her eyes were wide and red-rimmed, her cheeks streaked with tears that mingled with raindrops. "Are you all right, dear?" Eleanor's voice sounded rusty from disuse. She rarely spoke to anyone these days, aside from cashiers and the occasional neighbor. The child shook her head, her bottom lip trembling. "I can't find my mommy." Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of something that had been tightly bound for years. She knelt down, ignoring the dampness seeping through her pants, and met the girl's eyes. "I'm Eleanor," she said softly. "What's your name?" "Lily?" the child whispered. "Lily Bennett." Eleanor's heart gave an odd little squeeze. Bennett. It was a common name, she told herself. It didn't mean anything. "Well, Lily Bennett, I think we should find somewhere dry while we figure out how to find your mommy. Would that be okay?" Lily nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Eleanor reached into her pocket and pulled out a neatly folded handkerchief, another of James's influences she couldn't seem to shake. She handed it to the child, who took it with solemn gratitude. "My house is just across the park," Eleanor said. "We can call the police from there and get you some hot chocolate while we wait." Lily's small hand slipped into Eleanor's as they walked, and Eleanor was surprised by how naturally their fingers twined together. The child's trust was a tangible weight, both frightening and precious. Eleanor's home was a small Tudor-style house that she and James had purchased nearly 40 years earlier. They'd raised Catherine there, filling it with books and music and the occasional chaotic dinner party. Now it stood quiet, meticulously neat, with doilies on the armrests and photographs whose glass Eleanor dusted weekly. "It smells nice," Lily observed as they stepped inside. "Like cookies and flowers," Eleanor smiled despite herself. "That would be the lavender sachets and the cinnamon candles. My husband always liked the house to smell welcoming." She helped Lily out of her wet raincoat and hung it carefully on the coat rack by the door. The child's shoes were soaked through, so Eleanor found an old pair of Catherine's slippers tucked away in a hallway closet. They were faded pink with little rabbits on the toes, saved for reasons Eleanor couldn't quite articulate, even to herself. "These might be a bit big," Eleanor said, "but they're warm." Lily slipped her feet into the slippers and looked up with a smile that transformed her tear-stained face. "They're rabbit slippers. I love rabbits." Eleanor felt that strange squeeze in her chest again. Catherine had loved rabbits too. In the kitchen, Eleanor went through the motions of making hot chocolate, real hot chocolate, not the instant kind. She warmed milk in a saucepan, added cocoa powder, a touch of sugar, and a dash of vanilla. Lily sat at the kitchen table, her legs swinging, watching Eleanor with curious eyes. "My grandma makes hot chocolate like that," she said. "Not from packets." Eleanor glanced over her shoulder. "Does she now? Your grandmother sounds like a sensible woman." "I don't see her anymore," Lily said with the blunt honesty of children. "Mommy says they had a fight a long time ago, before I was born." Eleanor stirred the cocoa more vigorously than necessary, something cold and uncomfortable settling in her stomach. She pushed the feeling aside and focused on the task at hand, helping this lost child find her parents. While Lily sipped her hot chocolate, Eleanor called the police. They took down the information and promised to send an officer. They also suggested Eleanor call the community center across from the park. Apparently, there was a spring art fair happening today, and several families with children were in attendance. "That must be where she got separated from her parents," Eleanor told the dispatcher. "We'll try that as well." The community center answered on the second ring. Eleanor explained the situation, and the young man on the other end exclaimed with relief. "Oh, thank goodness. We have frantic parents here looking for their little girl, Lily Bennett, right? Red raincoat? They've been searching the entire center and surrounding blocks." "That's her," Eleanor confirmed, watching as Lily used her finger to scoop the last of the whipped cream from her mug. "She's safe with me. We're at 47 Maple Street, just across from the eastern edge of the park. I'll let them know right away. They'll probably be there in just a few minutes." Eleanor hung up the phone, a mixture of relief and unexpected regret washing over her. She'd only known this child for half an hour, yet the thought of Lily leaving created a hollow feeling in her chest. "Good news, Lily. Your parents are on their way. They've been looking for you." Lily's face brightened. "Mommy and Daddy are coming here?" "Yes, very soon." Eleanor busied herself washing the chocolate-smeared mug, keeping her back to the child so Lily wouldn't see the strange emotion crossing her face. "Were you at the art fair with them?" "Uh-huh. Daddy was showing his paintings. I was looking at the clay animals, and then I couldn't find them anymore. So I went outside to see if they were there, but they weren't. Then it started raining, so I went to the park to hide under the slide." Eleanor dried her hands on a dish towel. "That must have been frightening." Lily nodded, her earlier vulnerability returning. "I was really scared. But then you found me." "Yes," Eleanor said softly. "I found you." The doorbell rang 15 minutes later, an urgent, repeated press that spoke of parental panic. Eleanor smoothed her cardigan and patted her hair, an automatic gesture that made her frown at herself. Why did it matter how she looked to these strangers? Lily was already running for the door, rabbit slippers flopping on her feet. "Mommy! Daddy!" Eleanor followed more slowly, her heart suddenly thundering in her chest. Something about this moment felt weighted with significance, though she couldn't have explained why. She rounded the corner into the entryway just as Lily flung open the door. A woman rushed in, dropping to her knees and gathering Lily into a fierce embrace. Behind her stood a tall man with rain-darkened hair and worried eyes. "Oh, Lilybug, we were so worried," the woman was saying, her voice thick with tears. So worried. "Don't ever wander off like that again, do you hear me?" "I'm sorry, Mommy," Lily said, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "But I found a nice lady who made me hot chocolate. Real hot chocolate, not from packets." The woman looked up then, presumably to thank this nice lady, and the words died on her lips. Her face went slack with shock, color draining away as though she'd seen a ghost. Eleanor felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Though the woman before her was in her mid-30s now, with laugh lines at the corners of her eyes and a style that had matured from the rebellious look of her youth, there was no mistaking her daughter. "Catherine," Eleanor whispered, the name feeling strange on her tongue after so many years of silence. "Mom?" Catherine's voice was equally faint, disbelieving. She slowly rose to her feet, one arm still wrapped protectively around Lily. "What are you... How did you..." The man, Catherine's husband, Eleanor realized with a jolt, looked between them with growing understanding. "Kath? Is this..." "My mother," Catherine confirmed, her voice carrying a decade of complicated emotions. "Eleanor Winters." Eleanor couldn't take her eyes off Lily, who was looking between the adults with confusion. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. This lost child she'd found in the rain, this sweet girl who loved rabbits and preferred real hot chocolate, was her granddaughter. A granddaughter she hadn't known existed until this moment. "You're Lily's grandmother," Eleanor said to Catherine, her voice barely audible. It wasn't a question. Catherine nodded, a complex mix of emotions crossing her face. Yes. Lily pulled away from her mother, her eyes wide. Wait, you're my Grandma Eleanor? She looked at Eleanor with newfound wonder. The one who lives far away? Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. Far away. She lived less than 2 miles from them, apparently. I think perhaps we should all sit down, Eleanor said, finding refuge in practicality when emotions threatened to overwhelm her. I've just made a fresh pot of tea. Catherine's husband stepped forward, extending his hand. I'm Daniel. Daniel Bennett. Thank you for taking care of Lily. His kindness broke something loose inside Eleanor. She took his offered hand, but found herself unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Instead, she nodded and gestured toward the living room. The next hour passed in a surreal haze. They sat in Eleanor's immaculate living room, perched on furniture that had not held guests in years. Daniel explained that they had moved back to town 3 years ago when he was offered a position teaching art at the local college. Catherine worked as a pediatric nurse at Memorial Hospital. And Lily, bright, creative Lily, was in first grade at Oakwood Elementary, the same school Catherine had attended as a child. 3 years. They had been living in the same small town for 3 years, and Eleanor had never known. Why didn't you contact me? Eleanor finally asked, the question she'd been holding back breaking free. When you moved back? Catherine stared into her teacup. I thought about it, many times. But she glanced at Daniel, who gave her an encouraging nod. The way we left things, Mom. The things we said to each other. I didn't know if you'd even want to see me. Or us. The words from their last fight echoed in Eleanor's mind. Rigid, controlling, impossible to please. And her own cutting response, ungrateful, reckless, throwing away your potential. Words hurled like weapons, leaving wounds that had festered for a decade. I've thought about that day every day for 10 years, Eleanor said quietly. What I would give to take back those words. Catherine looked up, surprise evident in her eyes. Eleanor had never been one to admit mistakes easily. James had always been the peacemaker in the family, the one who could apologize first. Me too, Catherine whispered. I've missed you, Mom, especially after Dad died. You knew about your father? Eleanor interrupted, shocked. Catherine nodded. One of my old high school friends saw the obituary. Her voice broke. I came to the funeral. You didn't see me? I stood at the back. Eleanor closed her eyes, imagining her daughter grieving alone at the edges of that terrible day. Another loss layered onto an already unbearable one. I've told Lily about you, Catherine continued. About her grandfather, too. I've shown her pictures. We even drive by the house sometimes. Lily, who had been surprisingly patient during this adult conversation, perked up. I knew this was your house. It looks just like in the pictures Mommy has. Eleanor looked at her granddaughter, with wonder. What else has your mother told you about me? Lily scrunched up her face in thought. That you make the best apple pie. And that you know the names of all the birds. And that you and Grandpa had a garden with sunflowers taller than the fence. Memories flooded back. Catherine as a child, helping her plant those sunflower seeds, her small hands patting the soil with serious concentration. James building a bird feeder and teaching Catherine to identify cardinals and blue jays. The 3 of them picking apples at the orchard each fall for Eleanor's pies. She hadn't made an apple pie since James died. The sunflowers, Eleanor murmured. I'd forgotten about those. I haven't, Catherine said softly. Time seemed to stretch and compress in that moment. 10 years of silence couldn't be bridged in a single afternoon, Eleanor knew. There would be more difficult conversations ahead, more painful excavations of old hurts. But as she looked at her daughter's face, so like James's around the eyes, and at Lily, this miraculous child who somehow combined both Catherine and Eleanor herself in her features, she felt something bloom in her chest that she had thought long dead. Hope. Would you? Eleanor had to clear her throat. Would you like to stay for dinner? The invitation hung in the air, fragile as a soap bubble. It was nearly imperceptible, the way Catherine and Daniel exchanged glances, a silent communication between people who knew each other deeply. We'd like that, Catherine said. Very much. Lily bounced in her seat. Can I help cook? Mommy says I'm getting really good at stirring. Eleanor smiled, feeling the rusty movement of facial muscles that hadn't formed this expression in too long. I would appreciate that very much, Lily. Every good cook needs a capable assistant. As they moved to the kitchen, this odd, unexpected family constellation, Eleanor felt James's presence acutely, as though he were standing just behind her shoulder, witnessing this moment he would have given anything to see. "You did it, Ellie," she could almost hear him say. You kept moving forward. The rain had stopped outside, and late afternoon sunlight slanted through the kitchen windows, turning ordinary dust motes into floating specks of gold. Eleanor opened cupboards that had been closed too long, bringing out ingredients and pans with newfound purpose. She instructed Lily on the proper way to wash vegetables, showed her how to measure flour without packing it down, let her turn the wooden spoon through the sauce with careful supervision. Catherine moved around the kitchen with the hesitant familiarity of someone returning to a childhood home, muscle memory warring with tentativeness. She reached for plates in their old cabinet without having to ask where they were kept. Daniel set the table, arranging forks and knives with an artist's precision. They ate together as the day faded to evening, the conversation stilted at times but gradually finding its rhythm. Lily bridged the awkward gaps with her chatter about school, friends, her stuffed rabbit collection, 11 and counting. Eleanor learned that Lily had James's gift for drawing, that she was allergic to strawberries like Catherine had been as a child, that she could already read chapter books on her own. "Before we go," Catherine said as Daniel helped clear the plates, "would you like to see some photos? I have albums on my phone." They gathered on the sofa, Lily wedged between Eleanor and Catherine, as Catherine scrolled through pictures. Lily as a newborn, red-faced and wrinkled. Lily's first steps, her hands gripping Daniel's fingers for balance. Lily on her first day of kindergarten, wearing a backpack nearly as big as she was. Birthdays, holidays, ordinary moments made extraordinary by the simple fact that Eleanor had never seen them before today. "I should have been there," Eleanor whispered, touching the screen gently as though she could reach back through time and touch the cheek of the toddler Lily had been. "I've missed so much." Catherine placed her hand over her mother's. "We can't get that time back, but we have now. And tomorrow?" She paused. "If you want." Eleanor met her daughter's eyes, seeing in them the girl she'd raised, the woman she'd fought with, and perhaps the friend she might someday have. "I want that more than anything." When they finally stood to leave, the goodbyes were tentative, weighted with the knowledge that this was not an ending, but a beginning. Lily threw her arms around Eleanor's waist with the uncomplicated affection of childhood. "Can I keep the rabbit slippers?" she asked, looking down at the faded pink footwear she'd worn all evening. "Since they used to be Mommy's." Eleanor knelt down, bringing herself to Lily's level. "Of course you can. They've been waiting for you." Daniel shook Eleanor's hand again, his grip warm and firm. "Thank you for dinner, and for finding our Lily. Thank you for bringing her back to me," Eleanor replied, and they both knew she wasn't just talking about Lily. Catherine hesitated at the door, then stepped forward and embraced her mother. It was an awkward hug, stiff with years of distance, but also achingly familiar. Eleanor breathed in the scent of her daughter's hair. Different now, some floral shampoo rather than the fruity one of her teen years, but underneath, still Catherine. "Sunday dinner," Eleanor said as they pulled apart. "Would that work?" "A standing invitation." Catherine nodded, blinking rapidly. "We'll be here. 1 o'clock?" 1 o'clock, Eleanor confirmed. She stood in the doorway long after their car had disappeared down the street, watching the space where they had been. The evening air felt different somehow, charged with possibility rather than heavy with remembrance. Back inside, Eleanor moved through rooms that no longer seemed quite so empty. She straightened the cushions on the sofa where Lily had curled up. She washed teacups that bore the lipstick marks of her daughter. She folded the dish towel that Daniel had used to dry plates. In the hallway, she paused before the closed door of Catherine's old bedroom, untouched for a decade save for dusting. With a deep breath, she turned the knob and stepped inside. Moonlight filtered through lace curtains, illuminating the twin bed with its faded floral comforter, the bookshelf still lined with Nancy Drew mysteries and biology textbooks, the bulletin board covered with yellowing photographs and concert tickets. Eleanor crossed to the closet and opened it, running her fingers over clothes that had long since ceased to fit the woman Catherine had become. At the back of the closet shelf, she found a shoebox labeled "Sunflower Seeds" in Catherine's teenage handwriting. Inside were packets of seeds, saved from year to year in a tradition she and James had started when Catherine was young, harvesting seeds from the tallest sunflowers to plant the following spring. Eleanor brought the box downstairs and set it on the kitchen table. Outside, the garden that had once been James's pride lay dormant, tended mechanically by Eleanor these past years, but without the love that had once made it thrive. Tomorrow, she decided, she would begin turning the soil for planting. Perhaps by summer, sunflowers would again tower over the fence, their bright faces turned toward the sun. She made herself a cup of tea and carried it to the porch swing James had hung the year they were married. The night was clear now, stars pricking the darkness above. Across town, in a house she had yet to visit, her daughter was tucking her granddaughter into bed, perhaps reading her a story, maybe even telling her about the remarkable coincidence of their reunion. Or perhaps not a coincidence at all. Eleanor had never been one for mystical thinking. That had been James's department, but tonight she allowed herself to wonder if he had somehow orchestrated this from whatever came after life. It would be just like him, she thought with a sad smile, to find a way to heal his broken family, even from beyond. The tea cooled in her hands as she rocked gently in the swing. For the first time in 3 years, the silence around her didn't feel like an absence, but like a pause. The intake of breath before speaking, the moment of potential before a new beginning. "Thank you," she whispered to the night, to James, to whatever twist of fate had sent her walking through the park in the rain today. "Thank you for the second chance." A gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes James had hung from the eaves, creating a melody that sounded almost like laughter. Eleanor closed her eyes and listened, feeling the tight bands around her heart loosen with each delicate note. Tomorrow, Catherine would call. On Sunday, they would gather around her table again. Next week, perhaps she would visit their home, see where Lily's life unfolded day by day. There would be school concerts and art projects, birthday parties and holidays. There would be difficult conversations and old wounds to heal. There would be time to build something new from the ruins of what had been broken. Eleanor opened her eyes and looked up at the stars, the same stars that shone over Catherine and Daniel and Lily, connected even when apart, family, even through years of separation. "A lonely widow helped reunite a lost child with her parents," she murmured, recalling the strange confluence of events that had led to this day, only to discover it was her own granddaughter. The story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But for the first time since James had left her, Eleanor Winters found herself looking forward to tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that.